Thank you very much, and thanks also to the organisers. I want to kick off with a few things that I hope will sort of raise the temperature a little bit, although we don't need that, but and add to the hot air in the room. So, a couple of things. I mean, I think the main thing is that we all agree that climate change and development and sustainable development are critically linked and inherently linked, but yet the politics is not responding in the way that we want it to happen. We see that it's impacting across all a range of sectors already at the moment, health, water, etc. But there's something strange in the way that it's framed, and I'll get to that in a minute. One of them is the narrative and the discourse around climate change. It's a future problem. It's not. It's a current problem. It's right now. Secondly, that it's an environment issue. It's not an environment issue. It's a political economy issue. It's an issue of where governments put their money, how they respond to their electorate. We heard some good case studies from that this morning. And also the power of the fossil fuel sector and the power of those people who maintain power having an impact on those people who don't have power. But I want to sort of make a call for a change in the name. Let's not talk about climate change. Let's talk about global climate disruption. And that's a term that's gaining ground, coming out actually of the US and out of the US advisory office in the Senate, but also from a group of human rights lawyers. That sends a signal that climate change is not a linear issue. It's a disruptive issue, and it's the peaks and the troughs and the tails where the damage is done in our society. But it's also an issue that is directly as a result of human interference. So that's one. And I think also the third thing is that tackling climate change is not about poverty and aid. It's about a gross injustice that's being perpetrated by those people who have the power and consume resources and have done so historically over time, and shutting down the development options for those countries and those individuals who perhaps don't have that. And we heard an interesting discussion from a colleague in Africa there about, perhaps why it isn't being discussed in those circles. And that's not something that's very palatable when you discuss it with, say, the UK government or the European or the North American governments. They really don't want to have that discussion. They want about the responsibility and the owner's responsibility being on the SDGs on the national government. And sure, that's there. But what the weak point in the SDG framework is that there is no accountability mechanism. So you can have these lovely MDGs, you can have these lovely SDGs, but if you don't have hard, fast targets and some accountability mechanism, you can't get that shift that's needed to deliver the change that we really need, that the science says that we need, that we're not responding to. Climate's also not a sectoral issue. It's across everything. And just because we can't find a box and we desire to reduce it to 12 or down to 10, does that mean we're responding right? The reductionist approach to kind of Western science to say that we need to get it down to 10, that's manageable. Well, maybe it isn't manageable. Maybe you actually need to have 24. You need to have a more complex understanding of the system that we're affecting. The other discussion, I think, is that the current development model will not deliver. When you hear a politician who's trying to get back and win curry political favour, they talk about growth. Gordon Brown, David Cameron, the UK, addicted to growth. What type of growth? Who benefits from that growth? Who's not benefiting from that growth? And the global sort of neoliberal market-based system has brought us now to this position where we have a tragedy of the commons, we have a massive transboundary pollution problem, and we have a huge rise in inequality. So we need a vision, and we need a direction for a new type of economy. And I remember talking about this in DFID about 8 years ago. They said, "What, are you some sort of Marxist? Are you some sort of, comrades, Reds under the bed?" No, I'm not. But what I'm aware of is actually that we need a change, and we need to be honest about that. And if we don't have it, we need to bloody well look for it. So the current development model will not deliver. I've talked about the need for an integrated approach, but there are 3 eras. We talk about 3 eras of climate change. The mitigation era, where we didn't do enough of that. The adaptation era, we've still not done enough of that. 100 billion, 50 billion for adaptation. Hurricane Sandy was 60 billion. The figures are all askew. But the third era is the era of loss and damage, which is not talked about in the SDGs, but is an era that is critically important in the new FCCC process. And that's about saying, guys, we're in this, the system's shifting, we've got impacts that we're going to prepare for. They're about migration, they're about disaster risk reduction, they're about loss of culture, they're about life and death and degradation of ecosystems. And in that sense, we need a more coherent, integrated approach to tackling, not this mitigation box or the loss and damage box or the adaptation box. We need a kind of vision for an integrated approach. Finance is the glue. Everyone talks about finance. We get finance, we get carbon markets working. Well, whoopee-doo. Carbon markets are not working, okay? There is not a good price in carbon. They're not going to work in the short term. Is the private sector going to deliver? Let's ask the question. Will the private sector go where poverty is? Is there enough money to be made in reducing poverty, or is there going to be a whole chunk of poor people who can't get insured, and therefore the insurance companies of this world won't deliver? So there's a big red line for me about the sort of overemphasis on the private sector and finance. The last thing is, who's going to sort this problem? We're in a mess. And we all say, well, NGOs say, well, the government will fix it, or this NGO is going to fix it. Well, actually, I think it's us who's going to fix it. I think we're in a new era of citizen advocacy. I think it's about individual people taking responsibility, saying, where is your mortgage? Where is your pension invested? Where do you shop? How much do you fly? And what is your local politician doing? And what are you doing to get out there and do something? And it's incredibly demoralizing when you see what's happening and you hear this kind of patter from people like me. But I think the only way to get around that is to actually start to take action ourselves and to organize citizen platforms. And we're seeing that in other sectors, the sort of the rise in the Middle East and other areas of sort of advocacy that's happening. And we need the same sort of surge around a model and a vision for where we can go together. So one little plug, or two plugs, London Climate March, September the 21st. Please go. If you don't go, please show your solidarity another way. Disinvestment campaign. Sort your mortgages out and your pension plans. And that applies to NGOs and everybody else. And then lastly, Sven Harmeling, my colleague at CARE, has produced this report for CARE and other people on the SDG process. There's copies here and also online. I'll stop there.
Good. Kit, that was a good appeal for us taking actions ourselves as well as our organisations. Thank you very much.